Hey everybody, before we start the show, I just wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Rob Toohey. Rob Toohey has a 32% market share of the virtual tabletop titles on DM's Guild, and he wants to help game designers convert their RPG products into Fantasy Grounds files for sale on that site. When you collaborate with Rob, there is no cost. He does all the work, so there's no risk. Rob gets paid via a revenue split, and he maintains the files with any updates or changes on the DM's Guild, and they're sold separately, so it doesn't affect the PDF sales or revenue whatsoever. Rob is a community developer for Fantasy Grounds. He's also been a guest on this podcast, and he is on Fantasy Grounds' social media team, so he knows the virtual tabletop platform well. He has been publishing on DM's Guild since the beginning, January 2016, more than 3 years now. If you'd like to see some of the projects Rob has worked on, just search for his name on DM's Guild. That's Rob Toohey. That's Rob, T-W-O-H-Y. Rob can be found almost anywhere on the interwebs as Rob numeral 2E. That's Rob numeral 2E. Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, Discord, Patreon, just Google him, Rob Toohey. He wants to work with you if you are a game designer, and also, he's a grade A class act, so go check him out. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I'm talking with Gregg Lauer and Lysa Penrose about getting more game masters into the hobby. I'm talking about players who are already playing and getting them to take the leap to run games. We talk about how to do that in organized play, things that have worked, things that have failed, and new things we think could work. It is a great conversation about growing the hobby. Here is my conversation with them. Okay, everybody, now I'm here with two of my favorite people, Gregg and Lysa. Thank you so much for joining me today on Tabletop Babble. Let's quickly go around the table and tell people who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games. And Lysa, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Lysa Chen. You might know me as @MercifulDM on Twitter. I am the community manager for Dungeon Masters Guild, one of the community managers for the D&D Adventurers League, as well as someone who's helping manage social media for Dungeons & Dragons right now. I am also a D&D designer, and I have my own podcast on this lovely network called Behold Her podcast, all about women in tabletop RPGs.
Yes. That is just a small list of things Lysa has done to improve this great community over the last several years. So, Lysa, it is always a pleasure to have you on here. Thank you so much. And speaking of always a pleasure, Gregg, it is awesome to have you here as well. Tell the people who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games.
Thank you, James. It's always great to be on here. My name is Gregg Lauer, and I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons for quite a few years and role-playing games in general. And I'm responsible for co-managing a public role-playing game group in Connecticut weekly.
That's awesome. Yes. Having a weekly role-playing game group is a rare thing, especially in your adult life. And that's something we're going to talk about. So today, Gregg, you brought this topic forward to me about how do we entice people to become game masters and dungeon masters in our games? How do we get people out to organize play and that sort of thing? And this is a question I've seen come up a lot, and I do not know the answer to, because we are seeing more and more players come out to game stores and event nights and things like that because they want to learn how to play D&D. And if you want to learn how to play D&D, it's hard for you to run the game if you've just shown up that day, right? So first, am I correct as far as you have seen, Gregg? Is part of the problem that we're getting more and more new players and not enough people to help bring them into the hobby?
I do believe that that's the case. I've been with this public group for quite a few years at this point. Basically, I started when Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition came into creation. So that's what now, about 5 years, something like that. And it just continues to grow and grow. And what we're finding within the last year, for example, we've grown from about having 15 people regularly, which gave us about 3 tables, to about twice that at this point. And we're about to expand into 6 tables. And we find that it's very difficult in some ways to be able to get people to take a stab at trying to run a game. They've got no problem with bringing a character or rolling up a character, but going that extra step and saying, hey, we'd rather not have tables that are 7, 8, 9 people in size. So we'd really like to be able to break off a table and have someone try to run a game becomes a little challenging. I think there are a number of people who would really love to do it, but they don't always know exactly where to start. So that's why I wanted to talk about this and see if we can kick around some ideas and be able to give people the tools they need to start to run games themselves.
Lysa, you have a little bit of a global perspective here, thanks to the communities that you work with. Are you seeing this problem happening in a lot of different places, that we're getting more new players than DMs can handle?
That's always sort of a problem people joke about in D&D, that you might become dungeon master and then you're dungeon master forever because everyone else wants to play. But even at my local Adventurers League night, when I was still organizing that over in New Jersey, there were folks who were coming to play Adventurers League. And I would maybe see that they want to be Adventurers League players and not necessarily want a dungeon master. But there were also people who would come to the Adventurers League night to learn how to play so that they can dungeon master for their friends in a home game. So I see AL as being like a really good onboarding for potential dungeon masters, but I agree with Gregg that there are certain things people could be doing to try to encourage folks to dungeon master or give them the confidence to do it if they're interested but not sure how to really get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, for my part, dungeon mastering, when I was a kid and I was growing up and learning how to play D&D and stuff, I was resistant to it because I was like, oh, Dungeon Master has more homework. They take on more responsibility. And then when I took it on, I never wanted to let that mantle go. So if you're kind of a control freak or you like to be in charge, give Dungeon Mastering a try, because it can be a good thing. Now, granted, you do need to learn how to share the story and all that kind of stuff. So we'll get, I'm sure, more into that. But I do think that it is a thing that people should be willing to try because it's fun. So that is just my 2 cents there, that like, hey, give it a shot. If you've always been curious, give being on the other side of the screen a shot, because it can be really fun. Now, with that endorsement, which I'm sure will bring 0 people to the table, let's talk a little bit about what people can do and what you have done. So Gregg, talk to me, because you have done some things, taken some steps with varying degrees of success, right?
That is correct. So a number of months ago, we actually ran a brainstorming session and said, hey, maybe I'm not coming up with all these ideas and there's something that you guys may know that I don't. Let's, take a number of minutes before our group and before we actually start to play and throw out some ideas. What do you think can help in order to be able to get people to run games? So we wrote a number of things down and we've implemented some of them. And I've actually feel that we've had some success. So to throw it out there, one of the things that I found actually very helpful overall for the group is that someone had recommended that we have our own Discord server. So I'm like, oh, that's an interesting idea. Oh, so now I can't, forever put away that social media thing. One more thing for me to add, but that's okay. So we created a Discord server and it was kind of astonishing. As soon as we made it public, it was amazing how many people within the first 5 minutes joined. It was probably between half a dozen and a dozen people within the first 5 or 10 minutes that just leapt at the chance to be able to get on there and go. And I think what's been good about it is that it gives people a central location to be able to talk about the group and gaming and Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing in general on a regular basis. So it's not just on Tuesday nights that you can get together and do some things. You can regularly discuss it. You can coordinate and you can have things ready to go on Tuesday. So I think that's been very good in terms of being able to organize players. And if a GM isn't going to be available for some reason, then you can know that ahead of time. And it allows you to be able to discuss and encourage people. So one of the people who had always been talking about, possibly running and things of that nature, since I was originally only seeing him on Tuesdays, it was a little difficult in order to be able to kind of continue to encourage him to be able to, and say, yeah, you can really do this and can do this, that, and the other thing. By talking to him on a more regular basis, I think that helped out a lot.
Nice. Yeah, I think communication can definitely be a key part in that. And having a way to, we're all very busy. So having some sort of way to have a sounding board, a community that you can bounce ideas off of is a great way to do things. Lysa, Discord is not my area of expertise, but you have used them before. I know that Tales from the Mist has one, and I am sure there are other Discord communities that you are involved in. Has Discord worked well for helping people GM?
Well, I will say, even in the Tales from the Mist Discord, and so that's a D&D series on Twitch, folks will mention that the campaign looks really fun and they would love to run a Ravenloft campaign, which is where our show is set, but they've never DM'd before. And just even having a community of people who, like, you put that out into the ether. And then everyone in the Discord, of course, is going to be encouraging and tell you to do it. I mean, we all want more dungeon masters. And so there have been one or two people in a totally unrelated, not related to like a weekly game night or anything. There have been one or two people who've tried DMing, even just from being part of that community.
And what are some other things that you have seen be successful as far as encouraging people to become DMs?
Something that I actually participated in leading up to my starting an Adventurers League night, and really starting to hardcore dungeon master every week for the first time, was a dungeon mastering workshop. I believe Baldman Games actually has like a PowerPoint or some sort of presentation that goes along with their training for dungeon masters. I went to a dungeon master workshop at a convention, and they went through tips for DMing, the different types of players you might encounter, and how to make sure each of those different types of players might have a good time. And if you're someone like me who was maybe holding back from DMing because of a lack of confidence of whether you could do it, taking part in like a little course or workshop is helpful because it makes you feel more prepared. I've also noticed the Adventurers League community in Singapore has done a lot of different workshops, and I've seen the pictures. They are always packed. They've had workshops for even like learning how to play different classes, but they have done workshops for dungeon masters. And that's cool because you might have a community of a number of people who want to learn to dungeon master who have the same sort of questions as you do. And that helps to see. I don't know if they do this as part of their workshop, but I think it would also be really cool to have like a new DM night or like a second part to the workshop where new DMs get a chance to play with an awesome group of players, maybe who are also dungeon masters willing to help out and answer questions along the way, but you're not necessarily committing to running every week at your game night. You're just going to try it out once and see how you like it.
Nice. Yeah, I think that is so true, right? That, I think one reason we talk about game prep so much when we're dungeon masters and we're giving advice to new dungeon masters and that sort of thing is because the crutch of being prepared helps us run games, right? Knowing what's going to happen every single moment can really help people feel like they know what they're going to do next. And then we sort of lose that crutch over time. Some of us don't need the crutch to begin with, or we know how much to prepare to begin with, that sort of thing. But I know for me and for many other people, it started as like I need to know every beat of the story and sort of drag the players through whether they wanted to or not. And then eventually I learned how to share the story and that sort of thing. And you, Gregg, have offered to do dungeon master courses as well, right? For people in your store?
Right. It's been a little challenging to get off the ground. I think because we have a weekly group and because of the space that we rent, it can be a little bit challenging in order to be able to coordinate a location and time unless we were to sacrifice a game night, which is a tough thing to decide whether or not we want to do. But to piggyback on what Lysa said, what we are going to do in about a month's time is that we are going to have one night where we're going to have new DM or GM, if we do something other than Dungeons and Dragons, for just that one night. And in addition to that, because people are such creatures of habit and they get so used to the tables that they're at and that the DMs that they have and the games that they're in, this will give everybody an opportunity to play at a different table and to be able to see what it's like to play with other people who have different play styles, or to be with a DM that has a different play styles. And as I said, really encourage people who want to learn how to DM to be able to do it, because it's a one and done, and then you don't have to worry that you need to build this tremendously long campaign with all kinds of possibilities. You can just stay extraordinarily focused and only worry about managing that one game. So during that, I'm actually going to kind of co-DM, sit back, and to be able to help one of the other guys in order to be able to go through a little game of his own. And other DMs are going to volunteer to do that as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think it will be interesting to be able to sit with some people that I normally don't and see how they play, and to be able to get some new people in there and give them that encouragement that they need in order to say, yeah, you can definitely do it. And not only that, I'm here in order to be able to help you and to give you guidance if you feel that there's some point along the way that you're stuck and can use it.
So I did a lot of organized play at my local friendly game store when I lived in Atlanta, and things ballooned. We got a lot of people coming in to play Dungeons and Dragons, and it was awesome. And we would have people who would run. We would get them to try running a game, and they would love it, and they would think it was great. And then they would say, "But I can't do this every week. I can't do this ever again because I need to read that 30-page adventure before I come here, right? Or I need to prep this or that or the other thing." How do we retain dungeon masters too, right? Because I think that's a big thing, is like keeping dungeon masters on board, because those dungeon masters will grow their skills and then eventually become jaded and not read the 30-page adventure anyway and still have a great time running. Not that I encourage that. I encourage everyone to read the adventure before they run a game. But I do think there are people sometimes when you sit down and they say like, "Oh, I just got this," or "I didn't have a chance because I didn't know I was going to run, but I'm going to give you a good time anyway," and they deliver on that promise. So how do we get people to that level and get them confident enough, and also get them to stick with it long enough that we can get them to sort of that veteran status? Lysa, what have you seen as far as that goes?
I mean, I've seen a number of things. One thing I think is important is to make sure that dungeon masters don't burn out. So if you've recruited a number of new people who maybe don't have the time commitment to prep every single week, having some sort of rotating schedule for them, or maybe someone is DMing a table for a couple weeks or 3 weeks, and then someone else takes over. For organized play, because you have those modules and you're not necessarily running a full ongoing campaign where you have to keep track of everything going on in the world, they can kind of be run as one shots, even if they're related stories. So you do have the ability to rotate people in that way. At my local game store, what we had an incentive program where dungeon masters could earn store credit for each person who sat at their table. And that worked out for the store because our store, you paid for your seat at the table each evening. And so some dungeon masters would run for a campaign or a certain number of weeks in Adventurers League because they wanted to get some store credit for a particular purchase that they had. But I will say, honestly, what kept people coming back was if they felt like their players were having fun at the end of the day. And when I was organizing epics, I could always get dungeon masters for those epic tables where we would maybe be running 12 tables at a time, because folks would have a really fun time running the epic last time and they'd want to come back for the event. So I think just having appreciative players really makes a big difference for dungeon masters.
Yeah. Burnout is a really, really important thing to talk about. And it's an important thing in your home game too, right? I've seen a lot of home games shut down because the DM gets burnt out. And one thing, we try to do sometimes is like pass around the DM chair, even in home games. And that can be a good practice to come up with in stores as well. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to take a quick break to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Kobold Press, the makers of many fine 5th edition gaming products, such as the Midgard campaign setting. And now you can get in on the Warlock Patreon. It's a Patreon-supported project from Kobold Press, and it is all about bringing dark fantasy options to 5th edition. We're talking character options, we're talking magic items, we're talking new monsters, we're talking adventures in awesome dungeons, and so much more. You can help expand the world of 5th edition dark fantasy at patreon.com/koboldpress. I have been a member of this Patreon from the beginning. It has saved my bacon so many times. So many good writers. Many of them are guests on this podcast. So if you like this show, you're going to love the Warlock Patreon from Kobold Press. Gregg, how about you? Like, what have you found, or what do you think works well for keeping those new DMs DMing?
I personally think that there has been a perception over the many years that role-playing games have been around and have evolved that there is all this time that you need to put into it in order to prepare a game as a DM or GM. So there's a lot of beginning game masters who feel that, wait, it's this large, overwhelming thing, and I don't know exactly how much time I have to put into it, and I don't know what's right or what's wrong. I don't know where to start. I don't know if they do this, how I'm going to be able to deal with that. And that kind of stress and anxiety makes people feel that they have to do all of this work in order to be ready. And you just can't do that week upon week upon week and not burn out over a period of time. So I think we have to think a little differently about how to DM and GM and come at it from a slightly different point of view. So lately, I've been trying to encourage people to think about different ways to be able to go about DM, concentrate on the things that are of high value. So I think, for example, that Mike Shea's book, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, is extraordinarily good about that, because he focuses on those half a dozen things that you can do to prep for a D&D game that are very high value and are going to be able to get you a 3 or 4 hour game by only doing up to an hour of prep. I also think it's worthwhile to try to introduce people to some games that have come out within the last 5 or 8 years that emphasize lower prep and are a little more instructional on exactly how to run a game. So I try to tell people about things like Apocalypse World and Dungeon World, which in their manuals are really, really specific about how to run a game and how to not necessarily think about every possibility that the players could possibly do. Just instead, play to find out and don't necessarily think about it. Just kind of start the game, ask a lot of questions from the players, and based on what they say, then you react to it. So if you can think of the game in that way, and as the GM is almost being a player in that they specifically are involved in the same way that the players are, then you're doing a good job of breaking down these barriers and not thinking of the GM as this completely different role, which has these completely different set of responsibilities and a much bigger part to play. I think if we think of it as more of like a player and involved in that way, and everybody has an equal share in the responsibility, then it will break down that stigma that it takes a lot of time and is hard to do.
If I can piggyback off of what Gregg just said, one of my favorite bits of an interview from Behold Her, I believe it was my chat with Sam Darcy. when she DMs, she likes for the process to be really collaborative. So again, sort of sharing the responsibilities in storytelling with everyone else at the table. So instead of describing a room, she might actually have people walk into a room and then turn to a player and ask them, well, what does this room look like? And the player contributes that and the story builds off from there. Obviously, easier to incorporate into a home game than, say, an organized play system. But you're sharing the storytelling, which is awesome. But you're also maybe identifying people who would make really good dungeon masters and tricking them into already doing a little bit of game mastering so that you can actually tell them, hey, you described this room really well. Have you ever considered being a game master? You would be awesome at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is totally true. And there are so many opportunities to do that. In fact, whenever I panic as a GM, right, I think we've all experienced the what is this NPC's name question, where we then are like, I don't know, bright lamp. That I've learned to say, you tell me, right? To turn that around, not just for my own selfish anxiety reasons, but also so that it gives that player a chance to build the world. And it also lets them see like, oh, this GM is fine with me doing this and starting to build the world out a little more. And you get to see how people take that. Another thing you can do is you can play games like Fiasco, right? Where these are games that don't have a GM. And so the storytelling burden is sort of split all around the table, and that also helps people see like, oh, this is a little bit more what this like, and set them up for that Lysa Chen beautiful question of, hey, you seemed great at this, what do you think of being a game master? And Gregg, you got into this a little bit. What is some good advice that we can give to new GMs if there are people out there who are thinking about doing it, listening to this podcast, screwing their courage and getting ready to do this? Lysa, what would you say to people who are thinking about GMing?
I think what Gregg said about not necessarily needing to have every possible scenario outlined ahead of time. I think you learn pretty quickly when you start GMing or DMing that you're not going to get great payoff for the time you put into that. And you start to learn and develop a skill for kind of rolling with the punches. So I think being open to that. And then I also think even just what you were saying, James, I still forget sometimes that when I have my DM hat on, that not everything is on me. Even a small thing like letting players describe what just happened in battle, what their kill looks like, or even just what their fighting style looks like. As a player, I love when the DM asks me to do that sort of thing. As the DM, sometimes I feel like everyone's expecting me to describe everything like Matt Mercer style. But players actually love taking ownership of that. Some players, there's probably other players who don't necessarily like the spotlight on them. But I think letting the players take some ownership of the story is good.
Yeah, I totally agree, right? It is always a good thing to do that. And you can usually tell pretty quickly if a player doesn't want to do that, right? If someone is on the spot and they pause or they, okay, maybe this person doesn't like that. And you can always feel free to ask. I think that's a big thing for me, is that playing in home or playing with a regular organized play group or even playing at a convention, you should know that everybody there wants you to succeed as the game master, right? They all want you to have a good time, because then they're going to have a good time. And so that's the big thing, is I think often we can get into our heads and think like, oh, it's our job now to entertain these people for this long. Well, it's just as much their job to also entertain you and interact with you. And everybody's going to have a good time if we sort of get in the mindset of like, how can we support each other? So that's one thing to consider, is you don't need to put a lot of pressure on yourself, which is easier said than done, certainly.
I will add that the one bit of prep that I have always found helpful and worthwhile is that if you know there's going to be certain combats or encounters, either flagging those pages, putting like post-its on those pages in the monster manual, or if you're using D&D Beyond, having those tabs for the monsters open, that has always been super worthwhile. So recommend that preparation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say if you have a written adventure, right? And we're talking about Adventurers League a lot, so you always will. That is something that really, I know I made this joke earlier about not reading the adventure. Reading the adventure and knowing it well is great, because then you'll feel comfortable improving within the adventure too, right? When your players go somewhere that the adventure doesn't necessarily cover, or try a solution to a problem that isn't spelled out, you will feel comfortable improving it if you know sort of what the end result of the obstacle is, or if you know all of the little bits and pieces of a trap and someone tries to overcome it in a unique way, you'll know if it can work or not, that sort of thing. So being prepared to be unprepared is a great thing. Gregg, how about you? What sort of new advice do you have for GMs that you have not covered yet?
I completely agree with you that it's everyone's responsibility to share in the fun, and that one of the road barriers is that a DM thinks that it's up to them. And I agree that it's the entire table is there, and they should all share equally in that fun, whatever that may be. Fun may actually be a variety of different things, depending on the people that you have at the table. One person may really enjoy tactical battles using the battle map. Another person may really get into the role play. So that's why it shouldn't be just up to the DM to figure this out. Everyone has equal parts and can bring their own fun to the table. You also said, with regards to Adventurers League, I think it is important that the DM know the adventure ahead of time, so that they can react in a reasonable way if a player does something that's unexpected. If you're going to do something that's a homebrew, or if you're going to, like we're doing in a month, you're going to do a one shot, then my recommendation is to keep things really, really as small as possible. And to start out with just a simple area that you start out in, maybe have a couple of NPC ideas to be able to talk to the players, and then build towards an encounter. The fact of the matter is that you learn as you start to DM that anything that you do, the players will usually, you prep way more than you have to. So it's best if you really do start very small, because the players will expand upon it, and they will always have ideas that are 300 times better than yours. So talk to them, have your NPCs interact with them, ask them a lot of questions. You will find that your players will have fantastic ideas that you can just build off of right there, and that you didn't have to come up with it because they did it. And they don't even necessarily know that they did it. But if you're aware and you're listening to what your players are saying, then you can identify a really great idea and build on it. And then they'll be all impressed. Like, wow, how did you know to go ahead and do that thing that I'm so interested in? And you don't have to tell them, well, it's because you were the one who actually mentioned it. And I just built on it. But no, it was actually you. So I think listening is a really important skill as a DM, and to ask those questions, really listen to what the answers are, and use those ideas. You'll have a fantastic game that your players enjoy if you do those things.
So what if you are in the position where you have lots of new people coming to your store, you have some veteran players, and no one wants to DM, right? You've put the call out, you've said like, hey, if you've ever thought about it, you've done all the encouraging, and no one is stepping forward. Is there a solution there that you can come up with so that more people can still get to play the games? And I know that is a tough question, because obviously it depends on sort of the individuals we're dealing with, right? And how hard-headed they are. But Lysa, do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, that's a rough question, because at the end of the day, it's a game, right? You want everyone to have fun. You don't want to force people to Dungeon Master. I think if I were in that situation, and I did have a bunch of veteran players who've been coming to the game night a lot, hopefully at that point, you've built a sense of community. I would just be straight with everybody and say, listen, our group is growing a whole lot. If we want to be able to still accommodate everybody, we need people to step up and dungeon master. And I would hope that people in the community would want to see it grow and would step up at that point. But I guess, again, it depends on those individuals. I don't know what, Gregg, help.
It is a tough question. And fortunately, every time our group looks like we are at busting at those seams and each table is at 7 or 8 players. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, if we have this again, the next session, it's going to be really bad that, we somehow get rescued some way or the other. There was one week that we had a new person who showed up and he was like, yeah, sure, I'll DM, no problem. And it's been fantastic. It's like, phew, we dodged that bullet. Just recently, there was a DM that I'd been saying to myself, boy, he has been going at this for well over a year. And I am wondering if he is ever going to stop because he's going to get burnt out. And just the other week, he came to us and said, yeah, I think that I'm going to step down. But because he had built such a following by DMing for this long, there are people that are standing up now and say, yeah, I want to do this. I want to be able to DM for these folks now. So if you have a good DM and good players, the problem does tend to work itself out in the long run. I think that all of the things that we've discussed about are important because you have to have these tools in place in order to be able to encourage people and make sure that that people have the tools that they need in order to be able to run when push comes to shove. But fortunately, I think that what you were saying before, James, is that people want everyone to succeed, so that I haven't seen yet with our group, fortunately, that there's ever a complete failure and a breakdown. In the end, everyone's going to pitch together to make sure that the group continues because they're having such a great time every week.
Yeah, I guess that sort of has happened for me too. At my Adventures League night, I was that dungeon master who DM'd every week for, I think, 2 years straight. And after I finished one long hardcover adventure that we were running, like half of the people at my table volunteered to DM the next campaign, kindly saying that they would love if I continued, but that they would totally understand if I needed a break. And by that time, I think they were kind of curious what dungeon mastering for the group would be like. But just like you said, Gregg, they want the fun to continue. So they step up. But I do think that also, even if your group is small, like you just have 1 or 2 tables, starting to foster that interest in dungeon mastering early, just in case. Because who knows, the group will grow and that will allow it to grow.
I am also a big proponent of when you DM, especially in Adventurers League, your characters don't get left behind. You're still gaining rewards for characters as you run adventures and things like that. They're gaining their milestone advancements and treasure checkpoints and things like that. So it really does make sense to, if there is a little bit of like a, I don't know, nobody wants to run, but then a bunch of people aren't going to get to play. It does make sense, I think, to step up, and you might be surprised, even if you've tried running a game before and didn't like it, you might this time around, especially if it's for a group of new players and you're getting to introduce the joy of gaming to them, right? And I would say if there are people out there who don't want to dungeon master, think about the community. All right. think about your chance to grow and be part of something greater, right? The person who sits at your table could be the next Lysa Chen. Think about that. And imagine if Lysa Chen had gone into a game store and had been told, sorry, we don't have a DM to run D&D for you. Then what would have happened?
This is such a sad tale. Such a sad alternate timeline.
Yeah, she'd be playing Magic the Gathering right now, okay?
Don't even say that, James. That's so true, though, that even if you have one experience DMing and it wasn't great, it is worth trying again. I've told this a few times. I don't know if I've actually talked about it on your podcast before, but my first experience dungeon mastering, I was so full of myself and thought I could run a level 20 one shot, which actually was written by James Introcaso, who I did not know at the time. And that was like the scariest, most stressful experience ever, trying to manage a table of level 20 characters my first time. And I swore I would never dungeon master again. But I'm so glad that I started my Adventurers League night, started with a bunch of people level 1, started with a bunch of people who hadn't played D&D before. They were just showing up to this new game night. And the joy of facilitating fun for people, but also being able to introduce this game that I loved so much to other people, and each week watch them evolve as players. That in itself, not even necessarily related to the gameplay, but just watching them grow and learn to love D&D, and some of them become DMs themselves, that in itself was so rewarding.
Absolutely. And if I may, yes, do not start with a level 20 adventure.
My hubris.
Also, also don't start writing adventures with a level 20 adventure, which is basically what I did. So I'm sure it is a very poorly written adventure too. I haven't gone back and revisited it because I'm afraid. I'm sure it is quite terrible. But there are hot chocolate elementals in
I was
it,
just about to mention those.
I think that's very true. Gregg, if someone is starting out like DMing for the first time, do you have any adventure recommendations that you think are good for first time DMs to run?
I actually think that the DMs Guild has quite a few things that are good for people. I pick something that's really small. A number of those adventures that came out for the opening seasons of the Adventurers League, which are like 5 mini adventures in one, I think are absolutely fantastic. And I've run those at our gaming night. I've run them for new people as well, because even though they're supposedly only for an hour, if you're doing them with people that are new, or if you're a new dungeon master, I think that they're really great at being able to get you into it and not have to know too much in order to be able to just roll up some characters and go. I found them extraordinarily easy to run and very worthwhile.
I love those because like the first one in the series of 5 might just be a quest and a combat. And then the next one introduces a puzzle. So like you said, really good for new players and new DMs.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so true. And it's a great way to train people to dungeon master. I have heard tell, now I am blanking on who does this, but it was a guest on this show who talked about that they have people run one of those 1 hour adventures, and then immediately after we'll have them run it again without any of the material in front of them to get used to sort of improving.
That's such a good idea.
Yeah, it is. And it's right. It's a short adventure. It's 1 hour. You probably have it in your head and that sort of thing. So, and they let you run it first with the paper, and then they have you run it without, which I think is great. I want to say actually that maybe it was not a guest on this podcast, but it was Matt Peterson of Canadian fame.
Oh, Montreal Adventurers League.
Yeah, I want to say he told me that he does that. That is a really fun and cool thing, and those adventures are always super solid.
Oh, we should probably, in addition to Dungeon Masters Guild, which has a bunch of awesome stuff, and specifically introductory adventures, we should also probably shout out the starter set. Lost Mines of Phandelver is a really, really fun adventure and set up to be a great first-time DMing, all new people adventure. And then they're coming out with even more starter sets. Like there's that Stranger Things starter set now.
Yes, exactly. I think that is going to be the way I get my family to play more D&D with me, because they like Stranger Things, right? Is to say like, ooh, look at this. But yeah, you've got your choice of starter sets, all kinds of great things on the DMs Guild. And if you're interested in playing remotely, might I recommend the free starting adventure on Roll20 that not only teaches you how to play D&D, but also teaches you how to play Roll20, called The Master's Vault, written by me. So yes, it's free. So it is. You get what you pay for with that one. But yeah, if you're playing remotely and have always wanted to learn how to use Roll20, that is another one you can totally check out.
I think you can just encourage people to be a little bit creative, but not go too crazy in terms of detail. So the thing that always works is have, the group start out in the tavern, have them do some interactions with some people that are in the tavern, have someone come in and say, oh God, something terrible is happening over there. We need some adventurers. And then you run out, they run into your standard goblins, you fight them, and it ends. And if you have role playing in there as well, it can actually kind of grow from there. And you can see, well, who are these goblins? Why were they attacking? And interacting with your players can be able to lead to who these goblins are, why they're attacking. Do they work for somebody else? Or is there some external forces that are causing this to happen? And then you can kind of grow your campaign from there. My point being that it doesn't have to necessarily be something elaborate that was either purchased or obtained from somewhere else. Just a really small idea can get people interested in learning how the mechanics of the game work, learning how to manage the players, to be able to move the spotlight, to make sure that everybody gets a turn, and then building the story from there. So there you go. I just gave you an adventure seed right there in 2 seconds. Feel free to take it and do whatever you want with it. Goblins are always great.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that is going to do it for this episode of Tabletop Babble. But before we go, Lysa, where can people find you?
You can find me at Merciful DM, MERCYFULDM on Twitter and on Instagram. You can also check out all the things that I have done, am doing at lysachen.com. Lysa also spelled with a Y.
Excellent. And where can people find you, Gregg?
So they can find me on Twitter at glauer42. I'm on Facebook at facebook.com/glauer. And if you live in the Connecticut area and are interested in coming to our public gaming night on Tuesdays, you can look for us on Meetup by searching for the Orange, Connecticut Tabletop RPG Meetup. And we'll be really happy if you show up.
That is awesome. So I would love to have you both back on very soon so we can talk about more GMing and organized play stuff and anything like that. So please, please, please come back. And thank you so much for joining me today on Tabletop Babble.
Aw, thanks for having us.
Thank you, James. It's always great being here. I really appreciate it.
Great interview and great advice from Gregg and Lysa. Thank you so much for coming on the show. People, this is not an inexpensive show to make, and if you have been listening to it for years, you can now support us financially. How? Go to patreon.com/Introcaso. That's patreon.com/INTROCASO, and you can find out all about the great reward and pledge levels that you can leave to help out with the show. I super, super appreciate all of you who are doing that. And hey, if you don't have money to support the show, guess what? You can still help us out for free. Just give us a little bit of your time, like a minute. That's all it takes. Go create a free iTunes account and leave us a 5-star review. Even if you're not using the iTunes podcatcher app to listen to podcasts, odds are the app you are using is using the iTunes algorithms to rate and recommend podcasts to others. So go leave us a review. Leave a review for all the podcasts you love. They will so appreciate it. If you leave us a 5-star review, I will read it out loud and credit the person who left it. Like Roganzar. Roganzar left a review entitled Guaranteed Weekly Listen, and it says, Tabletop Babble is a show I listen to every week. I've enjoyed James's interviews ever since he was on the Tome Show, which continue to get better and better. He has a knack for getting amazing people on and really bringing out some great stuff from his guests. If you aren't listening to Tabletop Babble and the other DSPN shows, you are missing out. I totally agree. Thank you so much, Roganzar. That is also an awesome name. Roganzar! All right, people, you can find me on Twitter at James Introcaso. That's at JamesIntrocaso. Also, check out my blog, World Builder Blog. It's all about the game design stuff that I am doing. Lots of free resources for your game. Just actually published a blog post that has advice on how to get started making podcasts. So if that interests you, go check that out. It was super fun to write. It's over at worldbuilderblog.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget, RPGs are like sex. Hey people, one last thing to let you know. This episode of Tabletop Babble you just listened to was brought to you by D&D Beyond. D&D Beyond are the makers of the premier digital tool set for Dungeons and Dragons. You can build characters. They have all kinds of great stuff going on. They have a public roadmap. You can see what they're planning. Their encounter builders out there. They've got great articles coming out every week. Tons of free content, and their paid stuff is totally worth it. Go check it out at dndbeyond.com and make sure you tell them DSPN sent you. All right? We're taking on Critical Role. That's right. We're coming for you, Mercer. We're coming for you.